Good afternoon. Today we have with us Dr. Prajakta Dandekar Jain. She is a UGC Assistant Professor in Engineering Sciences at the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences and Technology, Institute of Chemical Technology in Mumbai. She is a Ramanujan Fellow, and her research interests include 3D cell culture, nanofibers and tissue engineering, RNA therapeutics, nanomedicine, cellular models for toxicity, efficacy, bioassays, biotechnology, and green chemistry, and more. Dr. Jain, thank you so much for joining us today. To start off, I'll be proceeding with my first question. Could you please tell us a bit about yourself and your journey?
So at the onset, Ehsas, I thank you for having me over for this conversation. So to talk a bit about myself, I'm basically a pharmacist. So my undergraduate education has been in pharmacy, Bachelor of Pharmacy. However, for my master's and my doctoral education, I was involved in the area of bioprocess technology. And for my postdoctorate, I was involved in molecular biology related research. So particularly in the intracellular delivery of siRNA against a gene that was relevant for pathogenesis of tuberculosis. So basically it was an evolution from pharma to biotechnology to molecular biology. So of course, molecular biology is a subfield of biotechnology, but yes, bioprocess and then molecular.
Thank you so much for that. Moving on with my next question. I wanted our audience to get a little familiar with some of the terms that are often used. So, if you could maybe elaborate on what the terms in vivo and in vitro mean and which one is considered better.
Yeah, sure. So basically, both the terms in vitro as well as in vivo, they are often encountered when we are doing involved in drug development. So basically, trying to analyze the safety and toxicity of newer molecules that are about to be launched into the market. Of course, that is much before the clinical trials. So in vivo basically refers to the work which is conducted within a living organism. So that could either be animal models or it could be then eventually human clinical trials. Whereas in vitro is the word term which is used to describe the work that is performed outside living organisms. So that could either be in cellular systems or in certain cases it could also be in microorganisms, say for example like bacteria in case of antibiotic sensitivity testing. Now, with regards to the efficacy, the in vivo testing, they produce more specific results and they are able to simulate the biological conditions a little better because basically those are living animals that we are testing our molecules on. And often the studies which are conducted in small animals like rats, mice, and then bigger animals like rabbits and then even primates, they are often correlated or they are used to predict what outcomes one may expect in clinical trials in humans. So basically these studies, the in vivo investigations will help you to plan out your clinical investigations by, working out on such correlations. In case of in vivo testing, although they are more realistic in nature, they are faced with a lot of ethical constraints. They're also more expensive. You need to plan out your protocols really well so as to be able to have meaningful and statistically significant results. So evaluation in enough number of animals so as to be able to arrive at that data. In case of in vitro testing, because of the growing ethical concerns now, what people are doing is that they are trying to replace a part of in vivo studies with in vitro tests. So basically, initially they started off with 2D cellular models. Now people are also working with 3D cellular models, which are able to better simulate the conditions in living systems. So although both these methods have their own advantages and disadvantages, they are kind of used for different purposes. So it's not really possible to completely eliminate the animal investigations, but at the same time, you can kind of reduce them by doing some preliminary studies in vitro trials. However, both of them would have to be conducted in combination so as to have meaningful data about newer molecules that are being investigated. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
I'm positive that it erased all doubt in not only my mind, but anyone who's watching this. So essentially, other than drawing our conclusion, the aim is also to minimize the amount of in vivo testing. If I'm all right, noted. And moving on, the next question is what is, like you already mentioned, what is 3D and 2D cell culture, and why is 3D cell culture considered better than 2D cell culture? Also, what all techniques are currently existing to culture cells into 3D sectors?
So basically, when people started off with in vitro investigations, they were mostly conducted in 2D format, where people grew cellular monolayers of different cell types. And then they exposed their drug molecules or the test samples to these 2D monolayers and carried out evaluation with regards to efficacy, toxicity, uptake, and many such systems. However, these cells which are grown in the form of monolayers, they do not exactly replicate what is happening under in vivo situations or what may happen inside the human bodies. So cells, when they are grown in 2D culture, they will not exhibit a normal cellular morphology because basically they are not making contact with an extracellular matrix, a component which supports the cellular growth inside the body or in vivo systems. Then what happens is that because you're growing them on a flat surface in as monolayers, when you test or when you expose them to your drug molecules, they are going to be uniformly exposed to the same concentration, and they are going to be suddenly exposed to a certain concentration of drug that you have planned in your investigations. So basically, the uh, situation of diffusional barriers, which are faced, so something which is inside in organ systems, if you consider them as circular objects, say for example, or even irregular shape, the cells which are at the center of those objects are going to have the maximum diffusional barriers as compared to the cells which are there at the periphery. So those are the cells which will be exposed to maximum concentration of drugs. And as you move on to the center of those organs, the cells will keep on getting lower and lower drug concentrations. So those kind of situations you are not really able to mimic, or you're not really able to create when you're growing the cells in a 2D format. So which is why also in 2D format, there's a limitation up to what models could be developed, or you can test only a range of cellular behaviors when you are trying to conduct your assays in a 2D format. So realizing all these drawbacks of the 2D cell culture, people have now moved on to developing 3D cultures. So here what is done is that the cells are grown along with a biopolymer, or they are grown along with a protein component, say for example, collagen, or anything which is able to mimic or which is able to kind of represent the extracellular matrix component that is experienced within the body. So that allows the cells to establish relations with the other cells and also establish relations with the extracellular matrix component that you're using. And that kind of helps them to give out a different response than what they would if they had been grown on a plastic plate in a 2D format. So that way they are able to better mimic the situations that exist within the body, better recapitulate the systems that are existing within the body. Also, when grown in a 3D format, the cells kind of do not exhibit an apical basal polarity. So this is a situation where the two poles of the cells, they start exhibiting difference in terms of the cellular contents or in terms of the responses, in terms of the cellular behavior. So that kind of situation is not occurring when you're trying to cultivate the cells in a 3D format, because you are incorporating that extracellular matrix component in your system. So that way, these models, the 3D models, they are more closer to the animal systems, more closer to the living systems as compared to the 2D formats, and you are able to make more accurate simulations of the test samples that you're trying to analyze. So over the period, people have tried to cultivate the cells in a 3D format using different methods. So again, that is divided into a scaffold-based approach or a scaffold-free approach. So in the scaffold-free approach, people, they generally rely on the ability of the cells to make contact with each other and form a three-dimensional structure. So that can be done either by an approach known as hanging drop technique. So basically you use a ultra low attachment plate in that case, which is a U-shaped plate. And when you add your cellular suspension, they kind of adhere with each other and make that three-dimensional globular structure. Scaffold-free approach can also be done by a hanging drop method, where you're adding a cell suspension over, say, for example, what I would call a kind of a film, a glass film, so that once again, under the influence of gravity, the cells are going to adhere to each other and form the three-dimensional structure. There's also an approach known as magnetic levitation, where magnets are used to create 3D spheroids or 3D organoids. Now, as far as the matrix-based approaches are concerned, where you're actually incorporating a third polymeric component, an extracellular matrix component, it could be either done by a hydrogel method. So you are basically using a hydrogel to kind of mimic the extracellular matrix. You're encapsulating or embedding your cells in it and allowing them to grow, to make contacts with each other, to make contacts with the polymer which you're using. Or you could use other approaches like preparation of nanofibers, polymeric nanofibers, or you could use either biocompatible polymers, or you could use biodegradable polymers, depending upon what kind of investigations you're aiming at. You could also, there are techniques where you use freeze drying. So that is kind of used to create a sponge-like three-dimensional structure, which is embedded with the cells. So there the scaffolds are separately developed, and then you seed the cells over the surface of the scaffolds. The scaffolds are porous in nature, so the cells are anticipated to kind of proliferate through the entire structure to create a situation which you may expect in an in vivo experiment. Then you can also, on a larger scale, the cells can also be grown in 3D format in a bioreactor, or more recently, so as to have a dynamic approach, that is, so as to be able to expose the cells to a continuous flow of medium. People are doing it also in microfluidic chips. So that has given rise to the organ-on-chip technology. And then people have moved on to using bioprinting, where hydrogels along with the cells are used as, and then you could also incorporate other components like, say, for example, growth factors, etc. And this kind of gives a better reproducibility. It provides the bioprinting because it is automated entirely. You get a better control over the cell culture. So this is how the techniques have evolved over time period.
Thank you so much for that answer. I find it genuinely fascinating when we were talking about the different techniques, especially when you were touching base on the newer techniques and how they're further evolving in a way, a perfect gateway for the next one. Could you please tell us what exactly organ-on-a-chip technology is and how it is created?
So basically, organ-on-chips are a combination of numerous different sciences. They are a combination of using cell biology, a combination of cell biology with engineering and biomaterials, and then growing them in a microenvironment on a microfluidic chip. So basically, microfluidics, as you can call it, it is a science that manipulates the processes at micro scale levels. So the fluids which you are utilizing, basically the cell culture fluids, if you're trying to grow an organ within a microfluidic chip, the cell culture media are being utilized in the ranges of microliters. Then the channels which are there in the microfluidic devices, so basically they are like, you could call them similar to your experimental slides, your glass slides, but which have been etched with microchannels. So these channels have their dimensions in the range of, again, a few micrometers. And then basically they allow the usage of very small volumes of reagents. You can pump these fluids through the microchannels. So you also have a control over the flow rate. And though these channels are very small in size, only in the range of a few micrometers, you are able to achieve a higher surface area. You are able to achieve a high mass transfer. Then you are able to achieve a precision and control over the flow of fluids. You can achieve better mixing. And that helps to create, or if you're trying to grow an organ, all these parameters together along with the cells it helps you to gain a better control over the conditions in which the organs are being cultivated. So basically, you can create biomimetic organs, that is, achieve flow rates which could be similar to what actually occurs inside the body. For example, in case of some organs, the flow rates that are experienced by the cells, the shear, the force which is experienced by the cell is very, very low. So when you're cultivating it in larger vessels, you're not kind of able to replicate that. But with such micro devices, you are able to simulate those flow conditions to kind of represent what occurs inside the body, which is why you call them biomimetic organs, something which is very, very close or very similar to what is happening within the body or under in vivo conditions. And then you're also able to achieve other aspects like cell patterning, tissue boundaries, tissue organ interactions. You can also use three-dimensional ECM components, which I just described to you in my previous question. You can also use them along with microfluidic devices. So basically, the microfluidic devices, they give a dynamic nature, or as I would call it, a perfusion-based nature to the static culture 3D studies that were earlier conducted. So that is something in just a nutshell. I hope that clarifies a few things to you.
Definitely, doctor clarified everything. Moving on, the next question. Could you please give us some examples of organs on a chip that have been developed in the past?
Okay, so there has been quite some progress which has been made in this area already. So people have developed liver on chip as single cultures, that is where you're using only one cell type, or co-cultures, that is multiple cell types from the liver tissue, so as to be able to assess drug toxicity. So again, in preclinical drug development process, these models have been utilized. Lung on chip models have also been created, where people have grown either monocultures or co-cultures at an air-liquid interface, because that is what happens inside the body, right? You breathe in air. So you have, of course, your lung fluids, but you also have air which is coming in. So the cells are maintained at an air-liquid interface within the lungs. So the microfluidic chips have been able to recreate that. People have also created breathing movement using these microfluidic chips. Kidney on chips have been again created for visualization and quantitative analysis of diverse processes that take place in the kidney tubules. Heart on chip has also been created with cardiomyocytes, both for healthy as well as disease cells. So there you can study the normal functioning, the normal biology of the heart, as well as what happens in case of disease conditions, so as to be able to design better molecules for various heart conditions. Intestine on chip has been created for drug permeability kind of studies. So where CARCO2 cells have been majorly utilized, they are differentiated after growth for a period of 21 to 28 days. And then after differentiation, that is when the cells assume properties that are similar to what occurs in human intestine, they are being utilized for testing a permeability of different drugs which we administer. So whatever drugs are being taken orally, you can study their permeability and kind of arrive at those estimations under in vitro conditions. And now people have gone on to create multi-organ on chips, or some people also term that as human on chips. So where different types of cells representing different organs are grown in numerous compartments that are created within that microfluidic chip. And then you have those microchannels connecting each other, because that's what happens within the body. You never have one organ functioning independently of the others. So as to be able to simulate those conditions, multi-organ on chips are also being attempted.
Like I've said before, Dr. Jain, I find this genuinely really fascinating, especially since in the formal education scenario, one often doesn't get these sorts of updates that I feel are so important. Which is, again, another reason as to why I make these sorts of videos. Could this technology potentially replace animal testing and also lead to maybe personalized medicine?
Right. So, like I said even earlier, you can't entirely replace in vivo studies with in vitro studies. The in vivo studies will still be required to give the exact dynamic nature of the organ systems that are experienced. So, you can't really cut them off. from your investigations. I mean, you can't really move from in vitro directly to clinical trials because that would kind of be dangerous as well. To test something directly in humans before even testing it in smaller or larger animals. But yes, they could partially replace the animal studies. So especially in cases where animals, the ethical constraints on animal-based investigations are growing by the day, and of course for valid reasons, you can replace a part of them and try to minimize the usage of animals. Answering your second part of the question, whether you can use them for personalized therapy, yes. What you could do is that instead of using cell lines, you could actually take tissue samples from patients. You could separate the cells under in vitro conditions and utilize those cells for creating the biomimetic organs in the microfluidic devices. Of course, this you will have to combine a little bit with the health data of the patient so as to arrive at a comprehensive conclusion, because because these systems, they will allow you to study what would happen if the patient was predisposed to different conditions, say like physiological conditions or diet or maybe environmental conditions. How would the patient respond, since you're creating those systems utilizing the cells which are actually from the patients. So that way the responses could be very close to what that patient would give if you administer the drug to him, and that can kind of help to estimate what doses would work for that patient, what drugs would work for that patient, what may be toxic, what may cause allergenicity, etc., so as to arrive at the correct dosage forms, arrive at the correct doses of different drugs, etc., or just to estimate what may work for a patient, what may not. So yes, so it could be a gateway to personalized therapy, definitely.
Thank you. I think it's also reassuring to know the fact that not only are we stepping towards personalized therapy, but while animal testing can't be completely ignored and it can't become completely redundant, it is a positive step towards animal welfare. Could multiple organs be integrated into a single chip? Actually, you've already answered this before. If there's anything you'd like to add to the point you made on how multiple organs could be integrated into a single chip and finally creating a human on a chip.
Right. So yes, people have tried that. So they want to replicate the pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamic. That is, pharmacokinetic is the absorption, distribution, metabolism, elimination of the drugs, and dynamic is the actual efficacy of the drugs in the body systems, whether they are able to elicit whatever responses they are supposed to. So what they do in such cases is that people have constructed different chambers, and where they cultivate different types of cells representing the individual organs. And the first step is creation of that. In the next step, people have also tried to integrate biomedical sensors. So that kind of provides a low cost approach and also a very convenient approach, so as to study different microenvironmental parameters, the cellular responses, the electrophysiological responses of the cells or the cellular barriers, etc. And even design or integration of multi-sensor approaches is also possible, so that you can kind of promote automated and continuous monitoring of various metabolic processes of the drugs or the efficacies of the drugs, etc. However, integration of the multi-sensor approaches is still being taken up by research groups all around the world. So efforts are very much ongoing in this quite fascinating area.
I completely agree with you on the point you made about it being fascinating. Thank you so much for your answer, Dr. Jain. This is more of a personal question. What is the most exciting project that you worked on till date?
Okay, so many of our projects are very close to our heart because we start them with some intention, with some background, and with a goal to achieve something which is meaningful. So, and we try to evolve as we learn during the process. So it's not that everybody knows everything in this world. So it's just that you make an attempt and try to learn more and more in that area. But if I have to pinpoint, maybe the project concerning development of artificial skin in our lab is something which holds a special place in my heart, probably because it was the first project related to tissue engineering that was initiated within the laboratory. And over the years, we have kind of evolved in that project. So initially, we developed artificial skin constructs with electrospun nanofibers, biopolymeric nanofibers, and using polymeric freeze-dried scaffolds. So those were static models, and these models were quite successful. We were able to achieve very good results, wound closure results, etc. when we used these constructs in wound healing models in smaller animals. Then we moved on to then we realized that, okay, static conditions was not really something which replicated the in vivo situation adequately. So in the next stage, we tried to create the artificial skin or skin construct within a microfluidic device. So where we were able to maintain continuous flow conditions, a perfusion condition, and we were able to simulate a situation which was closer to the in vivo situation. And in the next step, we have tried to integrate bioprinting components. So those studies are currently ongoing. So with bioprinting, we aim to achieve a better control over cell numbers, their spatiotemporal orientation, etc. So basically have better control over the process. So the project has kind of grown along with the lab, which is why it's something which is quite dear to me.
It's really interesting to note how this one single project further branched off and created a whole new avenue for many other. And I think also the fact that research itself has a lot to do with experimenting and just trying out different techniques. And if something doesn't work, then trying something else. I think that itself, yeah.
And many a times you learn more, and then you know that, oh, this is something which could be developed into something more advanced or something more relevant. So it's like I said, it's not just about achieving something, but it's also about learning through the process. So that's quite satisfying, I would say.
Definitely, I can only imagine. My next question, and unfortunately, we're nearing the end. Your work also focuses on green biotechnology. Could you please tell us a little bit about it?
So in the area of green biotechnology, basically we are working with enzymes as biocatalysts. We are working with other inorganic green catalysts, which are environmentally more friendly as compared to the traditional catalysts that have been utilized. And we have also been working with green solvents like ionic liquids or deep eutectic solvents, etc. So we have been using all these components to be able to modify biopolymers. Say one example which I can give you is of chitosan modification. So chitosan is a marine biopolymer which has immense applications in healthcare. However, the molecular weight of this biopolymer is quite high. So it does not solubilize in water. Basically at a neutral pH, it is insoluble. It is soluble at an acidic pH, but that many a time becomes a little cumbersome if you have to develop drug delivery systems. So we have used a combination of biocatalyst as well as green solvents to be able to convert that chitosan into a version that is water soluble. Similarly, we have also used deep eutectic solvents, which are again green solvents, for extraction of vitamin D from natural sources, for creation of biguanide-based antiseptic agents, so which are traditionally created by processes that involve carcinogenic reagents. So we have tried to replace them with such green components so as to make the processes more environmentally friendly and sustainable. And so basically all these are not the mainstream projects of our lab. These are kind of side projects, but they still have industrial importance because of their greenness and because of their friendliness towards the environment as well as humans.
Right. Thank you so much. Moving on. Were you always interested in research, or did this interest develop later on in life?
So, no, it was not. I'll be very frank. I did not plan from my school that I was going to be in research. The interest gradually developed as I moved from my master's thesis work till my PDF. Of course, I mean, having grown up in a family of clinicians, I was always inclined to be in one of the areas of science. So that was always my liking. But if you ask me specifically whether I was going to be involved in research always, no. I mean, I had not. It was neither. It is neither a yes nor a no. It kind of happened more gradually.
That's also a little bit reassuring for me personally, because I'm still a little bit conflicted as to whether I should pursue research or maybe some other avenue within biology and maybe chemistry.
So maybe it just happens that at some point it kind of clicks that, okay, this is what I want to do or I don't want to do. So as you go on, there definitely occurs one moment when you realize that yes, probably this is something which you will like to do.
Definitely, Dr. Jen, and I'm still waiting for that realization point, and I'm hopeful about it coming.
Definitely, you'll achieve.
Yeah, moving on. How would you compare your research experience in India versus abroad?
So, frankly speaking, I've been for my postdoctoral research in Germany for a brief period of 2 years. So, I had not, when I went there, I did not expect it to create a very significant impact. But it actually helped me to shape my outlook. The lab which we were in Germany was fantastic in terms of having people with different expertises from all over the world. So it was both a very good time, scientific time as well as cultural time that we experienced, and that probably kind of also shaped how we wanted to look at our lab, like when I wanted to come back. So my supervisor, Professor Lair, was like a mentor to me. So along with research, we also learned from him how to conduct the lab. So as he has put it in his own words, like probably now a decade back, that it's an art. Managing a lab is like conducting music. So you have people from different backgrounds, but then all have to be in sync with each other so that the music of science that comes out is quite melodious. So it's actually like that, rather than conducting experiments. It's a mixture of art and science to be managing people with different backgrounds at the same time and different projects at the same time. So my lab at ICT Mumbai is also has researchers who have specialties in different areas, and they bring in a lot of complementarity to the projects that we are conducting within the laboratory. And this quite helps. I mean, having people with different know-hows, it kind of helps us to look at the same project from different angles. So that is something which we have quite enjoyed in our lab.
I I love the comparison that was made between working in a lab and music, because often when the idea of research is introduced to us or pursuing research, there's little to no emphasis on harmony, not only in terms of scientific means, but also in terms of culture and just people overall.
Definitely, it's all about people actually.
Yeah, completely agree. Moving on. For unfortunately our last question this time, what would your advice be to anybody who is interested in STEM as a career path?
Um, so people who have decided that they are going to be in STEM related career, I'm sure they're already going to be good at science and they are going to be genuinely interested in doing whatever they have planned. But what I want to say here or kind of reiterate is that so many times it's necessary to just hang in there. It's necessary to believe in your projects, even though you may have deflections, even if your timelines may have been missed out. It is very necessary to believe in the ideas or the rationale with which you have initiated your projects, and it is very necessary to keep on continuing having faith in your team, in your group of researchers, and so that one day the projects are going to be successful. So you need to have faith in them to take it to completion and successful completion. Even if the projects don't go the way you want to, there are many learning points in the process. So that can always help you to take your lab in different directions. So basically, patience and faith is something which is just needed to stay in there.
Definitely. And this is actually a constant question throughout all of my videos so far, and will most definitely remain a constant question. I don't think this sort of perspective has been given before, and it's really refreshing and really, I genuinely really relate to this. The idea of just keeping faith and just keeping pressing on, and even if you miss a few deadlines, just believing in yourself. Thank you so much, Dr. Jen, for taking out the time to have a talk with me and for allowing me to present this to the rest of the world or the online world. Um, I really enjoyed speaking with you and learning so many things about research, especially as maybe a potential researcher in the future. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know this has been pending since a very long time due to various reasons, but I'm glad that we could have this chat. And believe me, I've enjoyed as much as probably you have right now. So thank you so much.